It was one of those afternoons where the heat seemed almost alive, a suffocating blanket pressing down on every corner of Ouagadougou. The kind of heat that blurred the horizon and made even the dust on the streets move slower. President Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old yet already carrying the burdens of a fractured nation on his shoulders, sat in the back of a modest black sedan. His official car, yes, but without the blaring sirens, the gleaming convoy, or the layers of armed guards that usually announced a leader's presence. Simplicity wasn't just a preference for Traoré, it was a statement. A silent rebellion against the extravagance that had for too long separated power from the people. As his driver navigated the chaotic city center, the car slowed to a halt at a congested intersection. Horns blared impatiently, and the humid air buzzed with the chatter of street vendors weaving between cars. And then, through the maze of bodies and exhaust fumes, he saw her, a fragile figure no taller than his car window, clutching a battered tray overflowing with dusty packets of peanuts and a handful of sticky candies. Her clothes, threadbare and oversized, hung on her like a second, heavier skin. Her bare feet danced lightly on the scalding pavement, but it was her eyes, a blend of quiet hope and worn-down innocence, that caught him, held him captive in that moment. She stepped closer, tentative but determined, her voice almost drowned by the surrounding noise. "Please, sir," she said, her words trembling in the heat. "Would you buy something?" Traoré's security detail, always alert, instinctively moved to wave her away, to shield him from what they saw as another inconvenience. But he lifted a hand, firm, silent. Let her approach. The little girl's timid gaze flickered up to meet his, a flicker of disbelief flashing across her face when the window rolled down. "How much?" he asked, voice low, unthreatening. 50 francs, sir," she answered, holding out a packet of peanuts with hands too small, too calloused for her age. Traoré reached into his wallet and handed her a few bills, far more than the asking price. But just as she stammered a shy, "Thank you," something inside him shifted. A decision made in the quiet beat between heartbeats. "Drive forward," he told his chauffeur, his voice calm but resolute. "Take the next street, bring her with us." For a split second, uncertainty hung in the air. The guards hesitated. Passers-by paused, curiosity flashing across their faces. But no one dared challenge him. The little girl, confused and frightened, was gently ushered to the car. She clutched her tray tightly, as if it were her only anchor to the world she understood. As she climbed into the soft leather seat, Traoré leaned forward, his voice a soft tether of comfort in the swirling chaos. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I just want to talk." Inside the cool sanctuary of the car, she shrank into the corner, her small frame overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. Yet something in his eyes, something steady, kind, unbreakable, held her there. "What's your name?" he asked. "Awa," she whispered, barely lifting her eyes from the floor. "That's a beautiful name." He smiled. "How old are you, Awa?" 8, she murmured. He nodded, his expression softening even further. "Do you sell these peanuts every day?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, sir. My mother is sick. I help by selling them." There was no self-pity in her voice, only a simple acceptance of a world far harsher than any child should know. Something deep inside Traoré tightened. He had heard statistics before, he had read reports, but here in front of him was not a statistic. It was a life, a future on the edge of being lost. "Do you like school, Awa?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. For the first time, a flicker of real light sparked in her eyes. "I loved it, sir. But now, I can't. My mother needs me." She spoke the words without bitterness, but they cut through him sharper than any accusation. He looked at her, this tiny fighter, this bright ember struggling to stay alight against the crushing winds of poverty, and knew, with absolute clarity, that this encounter could not end here. "You deserve to be a child," he said, his hand resting gently on her thin shoulder. You deserve to learn. You deserve to dream about your future. His voice was steady, almost solemn. And I promise you, Awa, I will do everything I can to get you back into school. In that sun-baked moment, as traffic buzzed and life hurried obliviously around them, a silent pact was made. A promise forged not in grand speeches, but in the simple, unbreakable bond between a leader who refused to turn away and a little girl who dared, against all odds, to still believe. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the dusty rooftops of Ouagadougou. As President Ibrahim Traoré leaned back in his seat, the quiet hum of the motor barely registering in his ears. He wasn't seeing the congested streets or the impatient drivers. His mind was still fixed on the small figure with the tray of peanuts, the fragile voice that spoke of sacrifice far beyond her years. Awa, 8 years old, and already carrying a burden most adults would struggle to bear. As the car rolled through the palace gates and the heavy iron doors closed behind him, Traoré felt a weight settle deeper on his shoulders. The kind of weight that wouldn't be shrugged off with a speech or a charitable donation. This, he knew, was different. This was personal. Awa wasn't just a reminder of the systemic poverty he had vowed to fight. She was a mirror to the soul of a nation still bleeding from neglect. He walked briskly through the marble halls of the presidential palace, past aides and security guards who bowed their heads respectfully, but said nothing. They could see it in his stride, the way his jaw was set tighter than usual. Something had shifted. Something important. By the time he reached the Situation Room, his senior advisors were already assembling. The room, usually reserved for discussions of national security, now carried a different kind of urgency. Traoré stood at the head of the long table, letting the heavy silence settle before he spoke. His voice, when it came, was low but firm enough to still the shuffling of papers and the tapping of pens. "Today," he began, "I met a little girl. Her name is Awa." A few advisors exchanged glances, unsure where this was going. "She's 8 years old. She sells peanuts on the street to help her sick mother survive. She had to leave school because there was no other choice." He let the words hang in the air, daring them to feel the same sting he felt. "This is not just Awa's story," he continued, his voice rising just slightly, carrying the weight of righteous anger. "This is the story of thousands of our children, forced to trade their dreams for survival, and we have allowed it." The room grew heavier with each word. No charts, no PowerPoints, just raw truth. "I want a full report," he ordered, turning to his Minister of Education and Social Policy. "I want numbers. I want to know how many Awas there are across Burkina Faso. I want to know why our systems have failed them. And I want it on my desk in 72 hours. Some advisors shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded grimly. They knew better than to argue when the president spoke with this kind of fire. "And another thing," he added, his tone brooking no room for negotiation. "I'm not waiting for paperwork to tell me what I already know. Tomorrow I'm going into the neighborhoods myself. I'm going to see, to listen, to understand. Not through filtered reports, not through sanitized tours. I want to meet these families face to face." There was a ripple of unease. A sitting president exposing himself to unscripted contact with the slums? It was unheard of, dangerous even. But Traoré didn't flinch. He wasn't asking for permission. That night, sleep barely touched him. He sat at his desk, the city lights glittering in the distance, and read through old reports he had seen before but never truly absorbed until now. Child labor statistics, school dropout rates, income inequality charts. They were no longer abstract. Each percentage point was a face. Awa's face. At dawn, without ceremony, Traoré left the palace with only a small team of trusted aides. No media, no grand announcements. Just him, walking the dusty backstreets of Ouagadougou where the official motorcades never bothered to go. The slums opened up before him like a wound. Crumbling mud brick homes, barefoot children darting between trash heaps, mothers bent over, fires cooking meager meals. He stopped often, kneeling to speak with an old woman selling mangoes, crouching beside a boy repairing worn sandals for pennies. sitting under a battered canopy with a mother nursing a baby with hollow cheeks. Everywhere he went, the stories poured out. Children leaving school because they couldn't afford uniforms. Fathers lost to preventable diseases because clinics were too far or too expensive. Dreams abandoned before they even had a chance to grow. Each conversation tightened the knot in his chest. And then, in one of the narrow alleys lined with broken bottles and rusted tin roofs, he met her, Fatou, Awa's grandmother. She was sitting on a plastic crate outside a crumbling home, her body frail and trembling. Her eyes clouded but sharp with a pride she refused to surrender. She tried to stand when she recognized who he was, but her knees buckled, and Traoré rushed to steady her. "My granddaughter. She sells food for us," Fatou rasped, each word a struggle against failing lungs. "We have no choice. I wish she could study, but—" Her voice cracked and she looked away ashamed. It broke him in ways speeches and statistics never could. Traoré crouched beside her, taking her withered hand gently in his own. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he said quietly. "You have done everything you could. Now it's our turn." He stayed longer than protocol allowed, listening to Fatou recount the slow erosion of her family's dreams, how sickness had eaten away at their savings, how Awa had stopped asking about school because it hurt too much to dream. He promised her, there in that broken alleyway, that things would change. Not just for Awa, for them all. Later, back at the palace, his advisors tried to temper his growing resolve with cautious language. "It's a complex issue, Mr. President," they said. "It's not just about money, it's about infrastructure, about societal shifts. It could take years." "We don't have years," Traoré snapped, his patience fraying. "Every day we wait, another child's future is stolen." He rose from his chair, planting his hands firmly on the table. His voice dropped, but its intensity only deepened. "We must act now. No more promises without results. No more speeches that make us feel good while our children sell peanuts to survive." The room fell silent. They understood. A new phase of leadership was beginning, not one built on optics but on trenches and sweat, on walking through the mud rather than standing safely above it. As he looked around the room, seeing both the fear and admiration in their eyes, President Ibrahim Traoré knew one thing with absolute certainty. Burkina Faso's children would not have to fight alone anymore. Not if he could help it. The battle had begun, and this time, he wasn't backing down. In the days that followed, President Ibrahim Traoré moved with a speed and ferocity that stunned even his closest advisors. He wasn't interested in ceremonial solutions or half-hearted reforms. Every hour felt like another missed chance for a child like Awa, another stolen future that could have been saved. The first steps were immediate. An emergency action committee was formed, comprised of social workers, educators, doctors, and economists. Their orders were simple and unrelenting: design a plan to protect and uplift the children who had been left behind. No excuses, no delays. Food aid was the first priority. Traoré knew that hunger was the enemy of learning and dignity. Within a week, government trucks loaded with baskets of rice, maize, beans, and cooking oil began rolling into the most impoverished neighborhoods. Each basket was tagged with the same message, stamped boldly across the packaging: "For the future of our children." Simultaneously, pop-up medical clinics were set up in abandoned community centers and makeshift tents, offering free health care to families who had long been forgotten. Mothers cradling sick babies, grandmothers weakened by years of untreated illness, fathers injured by years of hard labor. Each one found a place where, at last, someone saw them. And for the children wandering the streets at night, temporary shelters were built, modest but safe, places where they could sleep without fear of violence or hunger clawing at their dreams. These shelters weren't just beds and meals. They offered tutoring classes, art programs, counseling sessions, the first stepping stones toward reclaiming a stolen childhood. Traoré didn't just want to feed their bodies, he wanted to feed their spirits, but it wasn't enough to rely solely on national resources. Traoré understood the magnitude of the task he had taken on. Quietly but relentlessly, He reached out to international organizations, NGOs, and foreign governments, sharing the raw truth of Burkina Faso's abandoned youth. No polished presentations, no sanitized statistics, just photographs, stories, and cold, unfiltered numbers. Thousands of children like Awa, brilliant and resilient, trapped by poverty they never chose. The response was cautious at first. The international community had seen too many leaders make promises only to squander aid through corruption or mismanagement. But there was something different about Traoré's approach, an urgency, an authenticity that couldn't be faked. Slowly, support began to build. UNICEF pledged funding for educational programs. Doctors Without Borders sent medical teams. Private donors offered scholarships and school supplies. It was a beginning. Fragile, tentative, but real. Yet success only painted a larger target on his back. Critics within the country wasted no time sharpening their knives. Newspapers accused him of grandstanding, of chasing unrealistic dreams. Opposition leaders sneered on television. One man cannot change the tide of poverty. Even some within his own administration grumbled behind closed doors, warning that the scale of investment would cripple the national budget. Worse yet, rumors began to circulate of funds being siphoned off before reaching the families who needed them most. Traoré did not flinch. If they thought they could derail this movement with whispers and bureaucracy, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. In a televised address watched by millions, he stood at the podium, no teleprompter, no prepared speech, and spoke directly to the heart of the nation. "We will not fail our children because of greed or cowardice," he declared. "Starting today, every franc allocated to child welfare programs will be tracked and published for public viewing. No hidden accounts, no shadow budgets. You, the people, will see where every coin goes." True to his word, a government transparency website went live within 72 hours, listing every project, every expense, updated weekly. Citizens could log in, see the progress, raise questions. And that wasn't all. Traoré, personally, led surprise inspections of schools and clinics, arriving unannounced to speak directly with students, teachers, doctors, and families. If there was corruption, he would expose it himself. The skeptics were silenced. At least for now. But amid the whirlwind of action and resistance, one thought remained anchored in Traoré's heart. Awa. She had become more than a symbol. She was the silent promise he carried in every decision, every sleepless night. One afternoon, carrying a carefully packed box filled with supplies, Traoré returned to the neighborhood where their paths had first crossed. He brought a small team with him. No press, no ceremony. The streets were just as dusty, the homes just as fragile. But when Awa's door opened and her mother, Fatou, recognized him, time seemed to freeze. Fatou staggered back, one hand covering her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief and gratitude. "You don't have to say anything," Traoré replied gently, stepping inside the modest home. "We're here to keep a promise." In the corner, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Awa, clutching the worn notebook he had given her days before. She had been sketching, a tree, vibrant and full of life, bursting with color. She looked up, saw him, and for a moment simply stared, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't quite trust her own eyes. Then she leapt to her feet, dropping the notebook, and rushed into his arms. "I brought something for you," he said, pulling the box forward. Inside was a crisp new school uniform, a sturdy backpack filled with notebooks, pens, pencils, and a pair of brand new shoes. There was also an enrollment form. Awa had been officially registered in a local school under a special government scholarship program, free tuition, free transportation, free meals, and, just as important, psychological support for children who had endured trauma and hardship. Awa took the uniform into her small hands, holding it as if it were spun from gold. Her fingers trembled, her lips quivered. And then the tears came. First, silent, then racking sobs that she buried against Traoré's chest. Fatu wept too, the sound raw and uncontainable. Relief, hope, overwhelming gratitude. Emotions they had taught themselves to suppress for survival now broke free all at once. Traoré knelt down to Awa's level, his hands steady on her small shoulders. "This is just the beginning, Awa," he said, his voice thick with emotion but unwavering. "You will go to school, you will learn, you will dream, and you will teach others to dream too." He stood slowly, his heart both heavy and light, as Awa clutched her new belongings like sacred treasures. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with obstacles, betrayals, and unexpected battles. But standing in that tiny home, seeing the spark of possibility reignite in a child's eyes, Ibrahim Traoré found something far stronger than fear. He found purpose, and he knew, if he could change Awa's life, even just one life, it would be worth the fight ahead. The dusty roads of Ouagadougou seemed a little less heavy the morning Awa stepped through the gates of her new school. Her backpack, once an unimaginable luxury, clung tightly to her small frame. The uniform, crisp and new, felt strange against her skin, like wearing a dream she hadn't dared believe in. Yet it was real. Every uncertain step she took up the cracked concrete path was a quiet rebellion against the life she had once accepted as her fate. Inside the classroom, Awa found herself among dozens of other children, some as nervous as she was, others already used to the structured rhythm of lessons and laughter. She sat at her desk, pencil poised over the first fresh notebook she had ever owned, and listened intently as her teacher welcomed the class. The words blurred with excitement. She wasn't just attending school. She was reclaiming her future, one syllable at a time. At first, the transition wasn't easy. Years away from formal education had left gaps in her knowledge, and there were moments when frustration threatened to overwhelm her. But each time she faltered, she remembered the weight of Traoré's hand on her shoulder, the quiet promise he had made. "Keep dreaming, Awa." So she pushed harder, stayed after class, asked questions with a boldness that startled even her teachers. Weeks turned into months, and soon Awa's name was whispered with admiration down the hallways. Her natural brilliance shone through, especially in mathematics and art, subjects that allowed her curious mind to weave through numbers and colors like music. Her sketches, once drawn hurriedly on scraps of discarded paper, now filled entire pages with vibrant trees, hopeful sunrises, and smiling faces. Her math scores soared, and she often stayed behind to help classmates struggling with their own lessons. Without knowing it, Awa was becoming something larger than herself, a symbol of what was possible when even the smallest seed was given a chance to grow. One afternoon, her teacher, a seasoned educator who had taught in rural and urban schools alike, sat down and penned a letter. She wrote not out of obligation but from genuine awe. "Mr. President," it began, "I want you to know that Awa is not only thriving, she is inspiring all of us. She proves that when we invest in our children's dreams, they don't just survive, they flourish. She reminds us why we must never stop fighting for their right to learn." That letter made its way to President Traoré's desk, carried with a formality usually reserved for state matters. When he read it, sitting alone in his office, overlooking the evening skyline, a quiet smile crossed his face. It wasn't just Awa's transformation he saw. It was a glimpse of a nation's future reshaping itself, one child, one dream at a time. As Awa's story quietly spread across Burkina Faso, it began to stir something powerful. News outlets picked up the story. From peanut vendor to top student, the story of Awa. Radio shows told her tale late into the night, and community centers displayed her drawings on their walls like badges of hope. What began as one girl's victory over her circumstances ignited a collective awakening. Across the country, other children and their families saw themselves in Awa. Communities that had long been numb to the erosion of dreams began organizing after-school programs in churches, mosques, and village squares. Local businesses, once skeptical of government programs, started offering internships to older students and donating school supplies. Retired teachers came out of retirement to volunteer in overcrowded rural schools. It wasn't government orders that drove them. It was belief, rekindled by a single story of resilience. President Traoré, true to his word, didn't let momentum fade into sentimentality. His administration launched an aggressive expansion of education and healthcare initiatives. Funding for rural schools tripled. New teacher training programs were rolled out, focused not just on curriculum, but on nurturing hope and critical thinking. Mobile health clinics crisscrossed remote villages, ensuring that no child's education would be interrupted by a treatable illness. Every policy was tied back to a simple, powerful principle he repeated like a mantra: no child left behind, no dream abandoned. But Traoré knew that not everyone was cheering for this revolution. Whispers of discontent grew louder among those who had profited from the old systems. Corruption scandals were threatened, bureaucratic red tape was wielded, like a weapon, and critics claimed he was bankrupting the treasury for an impossible utopia. Yet each time the pressure mounted, Traoré returned to his anchor: Awa. If they could see what he had seen, if they could feel the fire he had felt burning in that small girl's heart, they would understand that there was no turning back. Several months later, the moment came to reaffirm the nation's commitment. President Traoré called for a national address, a speech not written for diplomats or investors, but for the people who carried the country's future in their hands. The night of the broadcast, families crowded around radios and dusty televisions, from the bustling heart of Ouagadougou to the farthest villages. His voice, steady and charged with quiet determination, echoed across the land. "Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso," he began, "our children are our future. We cannot allow poverty, illness, or neglect to rob them of their dreams. The story of Awa is not just one story. It is the story of thousands. It is the story of Burkina Faso itself. Today I renew my vow. No child should be on the streets when they should be in school. No family should have to choose between food and education. Together, we will build a nation where every child's dream has a fighting chance to become reality." The speech electrified the country. Civil society groups pledged new initiatives. Churches and mosques opened free tutoring programs. Youth organizations launched mentorship drives. Even private corporations, sensing both duty and opportunity, invested in rural scholarship funds. For the first time in decades, there was a collective sense that change was not just possible, it was already happening. And still, amidst the sweeping national movement, one quiet reunion remained. One morning, unannounced and without entourage, Traoré returned to a small renovated school in the outskirts of Bobo-Dioulasso. He walked through the schoolyard, nodding politely, to the teachers and students who recognized him only after second glances. In a sunlit classroom, his gaze fell upon a familiar figure, a young girl, a little taller now, sitting at her desk, deeply engrossed in sketching a tree in a thick notebook. He stepped closer, and without lifting her head, she spoke, a playful smile teasing the corner of her mouth. "Good morning, Mr. President. Today I'm learning about ecosystems." Traoré chuckled, feeling an unexpected lump rise in his throat. Awa looked up at him, her eyes no longer timid, no longer shadowed by fear, but alive with curiosity, strength, and joy. Around her, classmates buzzed with laughter and energy. The classroom felt light, the kind of light that only comes when hope is no longer a stranger. As he knelt beside her desk, Traoré placed a hand gently on her shoulder, meeting her confident gaze with one of immense pride. "Keep going," he said, voice low and full of conviction. "You are the future of this nation." And as he stepped back into the golden sunlight outside, President Ibrahim Traoré knew that the road ahead was still long, still uncertain, but as long as there were children like Awa, willing to dream, willing to fight for a better world, he would never, ever stop walking that road with them. That night, long after the schoolyard had emptied and the last rays of sunlight had surrendered to the deep indigo of evening, President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone by the wide window of his office. Outside, the lights of Ouagadougou shimmered, like distant constellations, each flicker a heartbeat of the city he had sworn to serve. He watched them quietly, one hand resting on the teacher's letter about Awa that he now kept close, almost like a talisman. The hum of the city below was constant, but in this moment it felt muted, like the calm before a coming storm. In the hush of the room, Traoré let himself feel both the triumph and the weight of the journey ahead. Awa's story was a beacon. Yes, but it was also a warning. Change was not a destination. It was a war, a relentless, exhausting, sometimes lonely war fought in boardrooms and classrooms, in crowded neighborhoods and lonely rural roads. And real change, the kind that rewrote the future for generations, would demand more than good intentions. It would demand sacrifice, perseverance, the courage to be hated by those who preferred the world broken, simply because they had learned how to profit from the cracks. Already resistance was gathering, whispers in dark corners, murmurs from those who had grown rich on stolen futures. Political rivals called him reckless. Business leaders accused him of threatening economic stability. Even some within his administration, men and women who had smiled for the cameras, now plotted in silence, fearing that too much hope was a threat to the status quo. And corruption, the old enemy with many faces, had not disappeared. It had only learned to wear new masks. Traoré knew it would not be enough to build new schools or feed hungry children. He would have to dismantle the systems that had made such suffering inevitable. He would have to endure the slander, the sabotage, the long nights where progress would feel invisible and gratitude would be rare, and he would have to keep fighting even when no one was watching, even when it hurt more to hope than to surrender. He turned away from the window, facing the darkened room as if facing the future itself. His voice, when he finally spoke aloud, to the empty space, was steady, almost a whisper but carrying a steel core. Our children are our future. We owe them not just promises, but battles fought on their behalf, even when the world would rather look away. Outside, the city pulsed on. Somewhere Awa was studying by the dim light of a lamp, a young mind burning bright against the darkness. Somewhere, other children were daring to dream again. But Traoré understood. The real test was yet to come. This was only the beginning. The next chapter would demand greater strength, greater resilience, a deeper willingness to risk everything for the fragile, beautiful idea that a better world was possible. And it would require others, not just leaders, but ordinary people, to step into the fight beside him. Would you fight for a child's dream? Would you risk it all for a dream like Awa's? Like, comment, and stay tuned for the next chapter. Together, we can build a world where no child is left behind.